Okay, good. Everything works. So this morning, I haven't given a title to my lesson. I wasn't able to really think of one. On the other hand, I want you to kind of give me feedback after I'm done and tell me what I should have titled it. So in a way, this is a kind of a suspense thing. Pay attention and tell me what you think, what it should have been. Okay, so I'm going to start off talking about a story of the USS Indianapolis. I think a lot of us have heard about this story before. It's been dramatized in movies, history books, such and so on. It was a heavy cruiser in World War II. It was torpedoed on the 30th of July, 1945. This is after it delivered the bomb parts to Tinian to end the war to end the war. It was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine around midnight, and it sank in about 12 minutes. Had 1,195 crew on board, and about 890 or so go into the water. So immediately, several hundred were killed in the wreck. About 316 of those ended up being rescued. Actually, exactly 316 ended up being rescued. The remainder of the 574 either perished due to exposure or to sharks. So losing your life to a shark is pretty bad. I think we'd all agree it's a terrible thing, but exposure is also a pretty terrible thing. Being out in the middle of an ocean, days at a time, all this water, nothing to drink. So it was a bad way to go for these folks who were on this ship, for these men. But rescue did arrive starting August 2nd through August 4th of 1945. And the rescue, starting on August 7th, August 2nd, let's see, I probably should have put my notes up here. I'll do that next time. But there was a plane that took off from Peleliu on a routine reconnaissance mission, and an antenna broke on the back of the plane, and the pilot went back to try to work on the antenna and happened to look down and saw there was an oil slick on the ocean. So the Indianapolis was running under radio silence. It was not supposed to be back in port. In fact, when the port it was heading to in Leyte, one of the officers said it had made it back. So nobody was looking for this ship. Just by pure chance, this pilot looked down and saw an oil slick on the water and decided to follow it. So in following it, he suddenly saw these folks, these men in the water, life jackets, vests, whatever else, on boats, bobbing around helplessly. He radioed this in immediately. Started dropping what he could in terms of rafts and emergency supplies, and went back. But within the hour, two more planes took off. One of them came back, circled the area, got there first, again started dropping supplies, but then another airplane, a PBY 5A Catalina, is the name of the plane, arrived on scene, carrying Lieutenant Adrian Marks was the pilot. Adrian Marks was born and raised in Ladoga, not too far from here. So kind of a neat story, a neat connection to our local, to our locality. So he saw what was going on and circled for a while, and he finally decided that I can do more if I'm on scene. I can do more for these men that are in the water if I were to land the plane. So he landed the plane, and to be sure, he had no protocol to do so. He had no instructions, no training. In fact, there were standing orders. You don't land seaplanes in the open ocean. Bad things happen. So he did it anyway because he saw a compelling need for him to do it, because he saw the sharks in the water with the men. So he landed the plane and immediately began a triage operation. Triage being, what are the most important cases first versus those that are less important? So, priority-wise, he said, when he got on the water, he said, everybody with the last name of Johnson or Smith, come up to the plane. We need to get you on board here. You're a priority. Officers, all the ensigns, the commanders, lieutenant commanders, you too, hurry up, get on board here. If you're related to Admiral King, who was the chief of naval operations in World War II, You're next. Come on board. Non-priority. So we got that out of the way, got the plane nice and packed. But those who weren't a priority, lone sailors, they weren't fighting hard enough. They may have been covered in a mess or maybe even severely injured. Those are the ones he said, no, we don't want you here. In fact, we're going to give you a little help here. We're going to give you this weight belt to help you train you better to swim, okay? When you put this weight belt on, you're going to be better at swimming. We're going to give you this instruction manual. Here's how to swim better, faster, and harder. We're going to help you. And then also, we're going to give you very strict instruction on how to do it. So in fact, at the end of it all, there were some that were just not worth saving, and they were just dispatched arbitrarily. Seems to be a grave injustice. Can you imagine being one of those men in the water, seeing people rescued in front of you, and being, on the other hand, giving these instructions, these things that are, where are you coming from with this? Why are you doing this to me? And this would have been a grave injustice because it's ridiculous. That isn't what actually happened. That's not what happened. But for a moment, I wanted us to think about, and I wanted us to think about what it would have been like to have been one of those men in the water and seeing this happening in front of you. I wanted you to feel that injustice, okay? Because it's very important to what I'm talking about today. So what actually happened, Lieutenant Marks landed his plane and he brought on as many survivors as possible. He sent out crew and rafts. So when he landed at midnight or so, or actually about 5:03 in the afternoon, he started bringing survivors on board. And when they landed, the plane was leaking. They had to plug holes with their clothes, with pencils, stuff like that, try to keep from sinking because the plane was in bad shape. But he taxied around trying to bring on as many people as possible. In fact, around midnight, he sent out a crew and a raft to go try to find others. They volunteered for it. So they went out very intentionally, tried to bring in other survivors and rescue them. And also he brought in, once the interior of the plane got full, he brought them in on top of the wings. And reading about the story, he had to tie them onto the wings with parachute lines so that they didn't slide off into the ocean. So he was doing everything he possibly could to rescue as many as he possibly could. So he was basically able to bridge the gap between peril and rescue when the USS Doyle, a destroyer, arrived and began loading survivors. So, there were more planes that came overhead, dropped more supplies, but ultimately they needed to be brought on board some kind of ship, and which happened. More ships arrived, and they were able to bring the survivors aboard. So, what is the point of my exaggeration? Why would I tell such an outlandish thing? Well, again, for an instance, I wanted us to feel how those men in the water felt. They would have been outraged, overlooked, devalued, right? And this can be the perspective of any one of us when we're on the fringe, when we feel like we've been overlooked. So the interpretation, I'm going to channel my Daniel here a little bit. The interpretation of what I'm talking about. So the priority, when you're not part of the mainstream, and I got a little bit of a discourse about the fringe here in a little bit about what I'm talking about. You might perceive a little bit of preferential treatment. You might see, this person's a part of the big family, or they're part of the teaching rotation or whatever, and you might perceive them getting some kind of priority, whereas you're sitting here in this mess and nobody's helping me, right? The weights. You lack faith. So imagine going to talk to somebody who's having a hard time. Maybe they've had trauma in their life, something that's affected them very deeply. And the first words out of your mouth is, "You lack faith." That's a weight that will drag a person straight down. The instruction manual, "You need to study more." Which all these things are true. There's an issue with faith. Studying more helps improve faith. But if these are the first words out of our mouth, have we really helped people? The drill instructor, "You messed up and you need to change." You need to be accountable for your mistakes. So I'm going to clarify something. A moment ago, I talked about covered in a mess. So some of these sailors, some of these seamen were in the water. They were in a terrible, terrible plight. And my comment was that these were sailors that the rescuers avoided. Too much trouble, right? In some cases, and I'm going to transition from talking about sailors to talking about people who need help. In some cases, people will put up a wall. And I know this because I'm an absolute expert at it. I know what I'm talking about here. When somebody's been hurt deeply and has trauma, they will put up a wall to keep others out. And sometimes they're very good at that and very successful. So what happens sometimes is that person is dispatched out of hand. Okay. That is not what I wanted to do. Oh, yes, that is what I wanted to do. Okay, so let me transition there and talk about what I'm talking about, the fringe. For folks on the fringe, actually, I'm going to back up here. There we go. So I mentioned this fringe thing a couple times. The fringe is a word you won't find in the Bible, but it's something that I think a lot of us kind of use to characterize, to kind of categorize folks who aren't part of the mainstream. So when am I talking about mainstream? And this is, I don't have a full definition of all this stuff. This is just kind of my perception of what the fringe is. Christians who aren't part of big families, leadership, teaching rotation, and this is not a one size fits all. This doesn't apply to everybody that's in this category. Singles, solos, they may have had trauma or mistreatment, maybe even been marginalized for their point of view. It's basically folks we hardly ever see. Who is this in the directory? Where did so-and-so go? Haven't seen them in a while. Or maybe even they're here, but they're not really here. Basically, somebody on the fringe is somebody who's at risk. These are contributing factors, somebody who's not part of a big family, somebody who's a new Christian, a new convert, maybe been at it for a year or two. It's kind of daunting to see multi-generational families and see the wonderful connection they have and think, and just can't help but be an outsider looking in at that. That's kind of a contributing factor, but not always. But basically people who are at risk, people part of the church, part of the family here who are at risk. So that's kind of my operational definition of the fringe. So for folks who are on the fringe, sometimes one encounters what I call fringe circumstances. You often see depression. There can be involvement in sin. You can see PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. You can see anger. Difficult things to deal with, right? So reaching out and making contact for the mainstream, if you will, is not without risk. When we reach out to folks like this, we may wind up with our sensibilities injured, right? Because we try to maintain these nice, pure households with sin-free. We avoid this, we avoid that. And when we reach out to folks who are on the fringe who are dealing with these things, we see and hear things that, whoa, what's going on there? It's not fun sometimes, is it? We may have to leave our comfort zone. So why is this important? I have a message for the rescuers. Because number one, God values souls. I'm going to turn to the very well used and very well known John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So when I read this book and wonder what it's all about, I see that God has a creation that he cares very deeply about. I see that God has created this man and given him free will to make the choices he wants to. And I see that God has extended himself to do whatever he possibly can to make that connection with his creation. So that's why this is important. And God shows no partiality. In Acts chapter 10, verse 34, Peter's talking about really Jew versus Gentile there. And Peter in that statement says, in truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality. So when we think about it, and our actions and who we're dealing with and who we're working with, doesn't matter whether they're a blood relation or not. It shouldn't matter, should it? Also, when I think about why is this important, it's our job. Let's look at the Good Samaritan. Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He said to them, What is your reading of it? So he answered and said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered rightly, do this and you will live. But he, wanting to justify himself to Jesus, said to him, And who is my neighbor? Then Jesus answered and said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at that place, came and looked, and passed by on the other side. So I'm going to pause right there. So we have a man who went from Jerusalem to Jericho, fell among thieves, was stripped, wounded, left for dead. Priest comes by, passes by. Got more important things to do, right? He's got to be about that religious stuff. Levite comes by, stands and looks, keeps going. He's got more important things to do. And oh, by the way, he's clean. He's not going to get unclean for this mess, right? But a certain Samaritan, verse 33, as he journeyed, came to where he was. And when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring out oil and wine, and set him on his own animal, brought him to the inn, and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, Take care of him. Whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. So which of these 3 do you think was the neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? Jesus asked. And he said, the certain lawyer said, He who showed mercy on him. And Jesus said to him, Go and do likewise. So, what I don't see here in this reading is the Samaritan's response. I don't know whether he was, not the Samaritan, but the wounded man. I don't know what his perspective was. I don't know whether, he had this terrible event happen to him and he woke up from it and his faith was good, all intact. Or maybe he was a little challenged. Maybe he was shaken by what had happened to him and there was something that burned into his soul, right? That happens with trauma. And anybody who's had physical trauma will tell you that it takes longer for the mental trauma to go away. That lasts a lot longer. So we don't know the whole story there. But on the other hand, when we look and see the obvious application, we see people who are supposed to be serving God have turned their head and walked away, whereas another person who's just had this mercy and has extended himself and everything he has to offer to help this person. So if this doesn't apply to us, someone is going to have to explain it to me like I'm 5. So, rather than expressing relief, a person's moving on, or they've fallen away, we don't see them anymore, they've got a lot of problems, glad I don't have to deal with that anymore. Our reaction should be grief, concern, compassion, and a sense of urgency. These are situations where we should feel compelled to be involved and do something about. So, and to do that, a lot of times we need to leave our comfort zone, because our comfort zone, when we come together, we do things that have an immediate reward. We have teaching, preaching, Bible study, children's classes, our public gatherings. They're not designed for entertainment, not by any means. They're designed to strengthen us, designed to come together as a church, to teach us, to learn. And these are positive influences on our lives. We have baby showers, we have pitch-ins, we have other gatherings, which are all great. And we should not stop doing these things by any means. But these are the times that build relationships, that serve as preventive maintenance and form a foundation for the future. This really is kind of our comfort zone, because these are the things that, in a way, feel very good to do. And we're authorized, I would say, to do any of these things, especially as we look at the teaching, preaching, and all that good stuff. On the other hand, there's a deferred reward when we reach out to the fringe, to the people who are having the issues. Folks under pressure with which we may have no experience. So we need to approach with caution and wisdom, because words carry weight. When folks there's all kinds of terrible things that can happen to people in this world. And if someone is under those circumstances, it can be like a manacle on the soul. It can be a staple to the brain. It's not something you can flick the switch and say, I'm done with that. It's gone now. These things take years to work out. So approach with caution and wisdom, words carry weight. I'm not talking about saying gasoline in front of Greta. I'm talking about, words like, can't you just get over it? What did you do to deserve that? These things have no place in our interactions. These are the times when we're reaching out to folks who are having issues, that we need to make a connection with them, that we leverage the connections we've already made, that we try to sit and listen before we do anything else. Because the best time to talk about, in my experience, the best time to talk about, you need to work on your faith, or you need to study more, is when the person themselves admits that and sees the perspective of what they've gone through. That's the time you talk about those things, not the very first time you encounter them. So that was a message for the mainstream. Now I have a message for the fringe, because I've been on the fringe and I've been beyond the fringe. I have experience here. Perception is a multicolored lens. What we perceive is not always the truth. Sometimes it can be misleading. Remember the story I just told you about the USS Indianapolis? There was a shred of truth in that nonsense I told you. When that plane landed, he went down and looked at the men on the water and saw this one group tightly knit together in arguably military formation, maintaining discipline, and he passed them up because he was going after the lone survivors, the ones and twos. And the folks that got passed up were outraged, indignant. Wait, where are you going? But he did it anyway because he saw a greater need. And later on, Lieutenant Marks was troubled by this. He thought, did I do the right thing? It haunted him until he saw a fellow in the hospital several days later. He was a doctor who was actually maintaining control of that little group of survivors. And he talked to that doctor and he said, did I do the right thing? Here's what I did. And the doctor said in a hoarse whisper, yes, you did. Because no person or group can meet every expectation at every time. So if you are a survivor looking through, or if you are undergoing trauma or undergoing issues, no person or group can ever meet every one of your expectations. In fact, the message I want to give you is that no matter how bad it gets, you can do it. God's watching intently, wanting you to win. And finally, don't give up on God. When I think about the words that I would have wanted to hear, that's one of them. Men will fail you, people will fail you, God will not. Don't give up on him. I also want to say for those who are having trouble, there will come a time when you will have release. Your anger will depart, and you will have perspective. And God will wipe away every tear. So ultimately, my lesson is about retention. And maybe retrospectively, that's what I'll title it. Because in Luke 15, we could talk at length about this, but for time's sake, I won't. In Luke 15, we have several stories about the lost sheep, the lost coin, the prodigal son. But in verse 10, likewise I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So everything I'm talking about, reaching out to the lost, reaching out to the struggling, there is much joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents. Bring them back. Our job is to ensure the actual needs are met and to help folks navigate to a better place. But what do people retain? It's an interesting play on words here, isn't it? People will forget what you said and forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So as we approach folks, we need to come with them with our speech seasoned with salt, with respect and honor and dignity. So that's really it. That's my lesson. And what I don't want people to walk away from is Rick thinks that everybody on the fringe is covered in a mess. That's not true at all. I'm speaking about a very specific portion of those who are dealing with things, and this is how we should be dealing with it. I'm also talking about that even though this lesson has been about kind of a how not book, about how not to do things, There's absolutely a right way of doing things, and I think that's a study for another time. But my experience tells me that sometimes these things need to be said too, because I didn't just make up any of this stuff. These are things that I've seen and experienced in my last 22 years. So these are things to be aware of as we're working with folks who are having issues. Unless we know about these things, we don't. So that's it. That's my thoughts. So I would invite us at this time, you know, for folks who have been having issues, it may be awkward, I don't know, to come up front and sit on the pew and say, I need help, but there's no harm in that either. There's no harm in coming to one of us individually, to a Jeff or to Steve or Jared or Brett or whoever. Come to us and get that help you need, because at the end of it all, nobody can do everything for you. You've still got to put forth some effort. You've got to paddle to that plane. You've got to keep breathing, right? You've got to put forth that effort to help yourself too. But there's a bunch of people here who are ready to stand and help. So that's all I got. So if we would, let's have our invitation song.